Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Two Guys and a Bible. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And right over there is William Bell, president of All Things Fulfilled. And hope your day has been going great. I got to tell you, so far this week, early this week, this has been a madhouse for me. Just seemed like I've been running about 12 different directions at one time. A lot of good things, a lot of things not so good, but nonetheless, that's the way life is. So, William, how in the world are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's good to be back. Good to see you back as well. How
Yeah.
was your trip and celebration? I take
Oh,
it
I had
was.
a really good time. We went to a place called Wilburton, Oklahoma. Uh, there's a state park there called
Mhm.
Robbers Cave State Park. And it got its name because some very famous outlaws, Belle Starr and
Mm.
her gang, some other outlaws, back in the 19th century, they had a cave. They found a cave back up in the woods. I mean, you can just, I mean, if you go there now, it doesn't take much imagination to think back what it was like when they were using this cave. I mean, it was in the middle of nowhere,
Wow.
but it's a cave, and that's where they hid out. And they successfully hid there for many years. Nobody could find them. Nobody could catch them. And then finally they were killed and captured and what have you. But now it's a state park. And 55 years ago, on June 20th, my lovely wife and I went there to the state park for our wedding night, or for our, honeymoon. And just a little snippet here of what happened to us. I won't tell you the whole story of that day, but we got there and we were in cabin number one or number two, which is way out in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of nowhere. And we pull up and there's this humongous raccoon sitting in front of the door. And the minute we would open the door of the car, he would run at us, hissing and
Mm.
just bouncing and hissing, and snarling. And it's like, whoa, whoa. And no matter what we did, we'd honk at him, didn't phase him. This raccoon had done this before.
Apparently so.
Yeah, he had done this before. And, I'm sitting there as going, dude, it's my honeymoon, you know, and we didn't know what to do. I would pick up a rock and chunk it at him. Boy, here he had come
Mm.
right at me, and of course, a raccoon, a dangerous little animal.
Oh yeah, yeah, very much so.
And I finally remembered that I used to collect, I don't do it anymore, but I used to collect cigars from people who, got married, had a child, got a new job, whatever. And I had a whole, glove box full of those things. Well, I took some of them, unwrapped them, and I told Jan, I said, okay, here's the deal. I'm going to get out and I'm going to run off kind of into the woods, hoping he'll follow me and, hope he catches a scent of that tobacco and hope he likes it. I'm
Hmm.
going to toss that. And if he chases me, you run up there and you unlock that door and you hold it unlocked where I can zip in there. Well, lo and behold, he did. He chased me off, and I threw the cigars, and boy, he scampered off after them, grabbed a couple of them, and ran off into the woods.
Mm.
So we make it into the cabin, and we're both just nervous as we can be, but nonetheless, uh, Jan says, "Well, I'm going to take a shower." She goes into the shower, and all of a sudden, I hear this blood curdling scream. And I run into the bathroom, to protect her honor or whatever. And they're in the tub, and the hot water heater is setting immediately next to the tub. On top of the tub, on top of the hot water heater, and down in the bathtub, there is a wad of granddaddy long legs, this
Wow.
this big, just a seething mass of them. And it's like, well, there won't be no shower, won't be no bath taken in here tonight. So that was our honeymoon night 55 years ago.
Wow.
And we determined that we were not going to stay in a cabin this year. We weren't going to risk that again. We stayed in the lodge. It's a beautiful, beautiful area. They've got a lake there, but I can tell you this, if you don't fish, if you don't swim, and if you don't boat, there's literally nothing to do there. So I sat and worked on my computer during the day. I got some good reading done, and she's got her Kindle. And so, that was our excitement for the trip.
Okay.
But it was a really good, relaxing trip. And of course, just getting away was as much as anything. And uh, since she's the best friend I have in this world, getting away with her, always a good thing.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting story, and
Yeah.
but I'm sure getting away and getting some time to relax and wind down was awesome and amazing. So it's very very good,
Yeah. Well,
interesting story.
yeah, well, and that's not the whole story, but I won't tell the whole story. Yeah, the day started bad, went downhill from
Hmm.
there until we got there, and it's been uphill ever since. Uh, so, William, what did you cover last week that we might continue this week, or do we need to just pick up in Ephesians 4?
Well, last week I just basically talked about the temple in Ephesians 2. I started around verse I think 11 or 13 and just went through the end of the chapter, but tied all of that together in terms of the temple and went back to the Old Testament, laid a little bit of a foundation there, and that was it for the most part. But just basically showing, I dealt with Ephesians 2:16 with the atonement, and from Romans 5, and also
Mhm.
from Ephesians 2:16 to show the already but not yet concept there. Um, and pointed out, basically the throne of grace and all of the typical concepts in Ephesians 2:16, with access to the Father, etc. So that's basically what I did on last week.
Yeah, I noticed there were a lot of good comments as a result of the program, which doesn't surprise me at all. Uh, and one of the comments that I read that I found particularly intriguing and pleasing was this one individual said, "I'm now beginning to realize that the atonement was not finished at the time of the cross." That
Well,
they
that's a
really
huge, yeah, that's huge
That's
for a
huge.
lot of people.
I don't know if you have been watching any of my videos lately on Yom Kippur, in which I've been trying to set forth that already, but not yet, that the atonement could not be consummated until the high priest came out of the most holy place.
You've been doing some um, interaction and exchanges on Facebook on that too, have you not?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So I've been kind of following that a little bit, and looking at the opposition to it as well, which is always interesting, of course, when you're engaged with them. So,
Oh, it really is. And I made comment here a little while back. I think it was on one of my YouTube videos, but I made comment that it had, pardon me, it had never occurred to me, pardon me, that there would be such vehement resistance to the idea that the atonement was not finished until the high priest came out of the most holy place.
Mhm.
And one of the very first times I broached that subject, I was just attacked, with double barrels,
Oh yeah.
barrel. I mean, the whole gallery of gunshots at me, and I was like, "What's the deal here? Oh, you're depreciating the value of the cross. You're saying the cross is not important." I go, "What?" I mean, where did this come from? And I keep emphasizing to people the atonement was a process. You cannot eliminate any of the processes. You cannot
Mhm.
depreciate the value of any of the steps in that process without doing violence to the entire process.
That's correct.
But boy, I mean to tell you, people have just gotten so upset at me. One individual, uh, boy, he attacked me. Now he's a staunch follower of Ed Stevens. And he and I have tied it up before, but he said that what I was teaching was just heresy and that the atonement was consummated, perfected at the cross. Well, I then raised the question, well, if the atonement was finished at the cross at the moment of the sacrifice being offered, then that must mean that Christ did not have to go into the most holy place and there offer himself as the sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, lo and behold, over the next 2 days, the fellow kind of jumps up. Now, he didn't tell anybody he changed his views, but he simply made the comment, well, the atonement was finished when Christ ascended into the most holy place. I'm going, aha. So when I pointed that out, and of how radical a change that is, now he only has to come one more step, you know. But he
Mm-hmm.
said, oh, it's not a change. It's not much of a change at all. It's just the difference between the cross and the ascension. I said, well, dude, that's 2 months. Those are two totally radically different steps
Yes.
in the process. So don't tell me it's a really minor change and the change doesn't amount to anything at all. And yet he has continued to accuse me of teaching rank heresy. Interestingly enough, I made the comment that he called me a heretic, and he said, I most assuredly did not call you a heretic. I said, what you're teaching is heresy. Okay. So this is what you call an argumentum ad desperatum, and a whole lot of other adjectives that can be used for that kind of argument. So anyway, it's just gone back and forth. He finally just got completely ugly. He got completely out of hand, accused me of not believing in the deity of Christ, accused me of not believing in the deity of the Holy Spirit, and on it went. I mean, he finally got kicked off of a couple of Facebook pages for his blatant dishonesty and for
Okay.
his, unchristian behavior. So as of today, he hadn't posted anything today. I don't know why, but be that as it may, this whole concept of the atonement, it's interesting to me, William, that as you know, I've got this good friend in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
He's a world-class Hebrew scholar. He's got two sons who are leading rabbis at two synagogues. And I wrote to him well over a year ago, and I asked him, is there any concept in Israel, historically, in the ancient times down to the modern, that the atonement could be finished at the moment of killing the sacrifice or at the moment of the high priest entering into the most holy place and before coming back out? And he wrote back and he said, that's ridiculous. He said, it is viewed as an organic whole. You cannot isolate one act from another without destroying the entire process. So when I've shared that with people, naturally the result has been, well, he's nothing but an unbelieving Jew, so I don't believe anything he says. To which I've responded, well, okay, those same Jews believe in Messiah. They believe in the inspiration of Scripture. So I guess since they're unbelieving Jews, that stuff's not true either. You started to say something.
Well, I was just listening to what you were saying there, and it just kind of triggered a reaction from that. You were talking about the group with Ed Stevens, and I don't know if you followed some of the commentary that's been going on with who was it that posted that? I think it was Charles Meek initially that posted something on resurrection on Preterist Voice, and then from there it was Daniel Harden and Colin is his name, Reese or Rice.
I'm not familiar with
But
that.
anyway, yeah, and so several of them, have gotten involved in some resurrection studies back and forth, and so that's been interesting as well to look at how they're dealing with the already but not yet concept as well. And people just get this idea that okay, it's all done. As you say, at the cross or, at some event prior to, and then we got to deal with something else that's totally different, basically, which winds up becoming a different gospel altogether.
Well, that's happened on Hebrews chapter 9, verse 28.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, Ed Stevens changed the definition of salvation in Hebrews chapter 9, 28 from being part of the atonement process, i.e., the forgiveness of sin as a
Mm-hmm.
result of the consummation of the atonement. He says, well, that's deliverance from the Neronian persecution, or that is deliverance from the trials and tribulations of the Jewish war. And we're
Stephen
going,
Wiggins did that in my debate with him. Remember on First Peter chapter 1, what was it, verse 9 or so,
yes,
and Hebrews 10.
receiving the
Yeah,
salvation of your
yeah,
souls.
yeah.
Yes. And so, as I pointed out in one post this last week, this is what happens when number one, you overlook or you deny the narrative flow of the context.
Yes.
I mean, scholarship is virtually united in saying the entire discourse of Hebrews 9, 6 and following is the Day of Atonement.
Yeah. It's
Uh,
hard to miss that. I mean,
it's hard to miss
to
that.
me, it's just extremely hard to miss that.
To me, you've got to try to miss that.
Yes. Yeah.
You've got to work at missing that. So what they do is they come along, and this one individual, he said, well, it's certainly true that some, an emphasis on only some, Yom Kippur typology was fulfilled by Christ, his death and ascension, but not his second coming. Well, so I challenge this individual, and I challenge anyone else to go to the text of Hebrews chapter 9 and show where, okay, Hebrews 9:26, once at the end of the age, he has appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. Okay, that's Yom Kippur typology. Verse 24, he has not entered into the holy places made with hands, but into the most holy place, into heaven itself, there to appear in the presence of God for us. Yom Kippur typology, high priest entering into the most holy place. Now, everyone has admitted and agreed that's Yom Kippur typology being fulfilled by Christ through his death and through his ascension. Somehow, some way, I have yet to find the separation in the text. No one's pointed it out to me. No one's even tried to point it out to me. If they did, I completely missed it. They go, I just completely missed it. They haven't been able to show from the context where the writer changes the subject from Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, meaning Day of Forgiveness, Day of At-One-Ment, reconciliation, all that tied up with Yom Kippur. Not one person has gone to the text and says, now, see, Don, here's where he changes the subject from forgiveness, from atonement, from reconciliation to physical deliverance from persecution.
Yeah. And, if you want a great context for that, Hebrews 9, Leviticus 9. And there's Moses and Aaron carrying through that very process. And that's, to me, largely where that text is being drawn from. So you got the Old Testament to give you the foundation of it right there.
The response when I brought that up in all of these discussions that I'm sharing here, Leviticus 9 has nothing to do with Hebrews chapter 9. Because Leviticus chapter 9 is the consecration, of course, this is true, it's the consecration of Moses, of Aaron and his boys, his sons, to the priesthood. Okay, that's fine. But guess what? Leviticus chapter 9, verse 12 said they had to offer the sacrifices for atonement.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean it was on the Day of Atonement, but it simply shows that their sacrifices were for atonement. And the very point that you were headed toward there in Leviticus chapter 9, verse 22 and 23, Moses took Aaron and his sons into the tabernacle. And there they sprinkled the blood. And they came out and they blessed the people when they came out, not before.
Right.
And the glory of the Lord was seen at that time. Now, if you can't see the parallels between that and Hebrews chapter 9, then back to what we were saying a moment ago, you're trying not to see them. Because if it was true that there was no blessing for the people until the high priest came out of the tabernacle after offering any sacrifice, after offering any of them, how much more was it true and how much more was it necessary for the high priest to come out of the most holy place on the most important feast day, most important festival of the entire calendar? And yet I had one person just this morning, William, and I gave this illustration. Hebrews 9:28 says, to those who eagerly expect him, eagerly look for him, That's from the Greek word apekdekomai, as you know, an eager, expectant, looking for. Well, I gave this illustration. In Luke chapter 1, Zacharias, who is not a high priest, or not the high priest, he was serving on one of the regular functions of the temple. Could have been one of the two regular Sabbath sacrifices. They did one in the morning, one in the afternoon, Numbers chapter 30. I think it's verse 6, somewhere along in there. But they sacrificed every morning, every evening on the Sabbath. We're not told exactly which service it was, but he went into the holy place there to serve. Well, the angel appeared to him and told him. And by the way, you can only imagine his shock. He's supposed to be the only person in there. And all of a sudden there's an angel in there with him telling him, Zacharias, you're going to become a father. Well, he's an old man, for crying out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And his wife is old. So he begins laughing, and the angel says, well, because you don't believe me, you're not going to be able to talk until the child is born. So he's in there talking to the angel, ministering and talking to the angel. The crowd outside was in fear because he took so long within the tabernacle or the temple. Well, why were they in fear? Because they didn't know if the sacrifice had been accepted. Now, the point I made was, if the crowd was fearful because Zacharias did not come out of the holy place, not even the most holy place,
Mm-hmm.
but if they were fearful because he spent too long in there on this regular, may I use the term, mundane day of sacrifice, then how much more important was it for the high priest to come out of the most holy place on the most holy day of the year and not tarry and not delay? This is why I'm convinced, this is why the Hebrew writers says, Hebrews chapter 10, verse 37, and now in a very, very little while, the one who is coming will come, he will come and will not tarry. He will not delay. He's writing later in that generation. They knew the high priest was supposed to come out of the most holy place in that generation. Well, now it's lingering on. It's lingering on. They were fearful, but he assures them, no, he's not going to tarry. So again, the point that I was making is you have the promise of the coming of the high priest out of the most holy place. You have the comparison of Luke chapter 1, a mundane service day, yet there was fear. And I called attention to the fact there was a Jewish scholar by the name of Zeitlin, Zietlin, I think is the correct spelling, who called attention to the fact that on one Day of Atonement, for crying out loud, this is Yom Kippur, he went into the most holy place, and there he spent some extra time in prayer. The audience outside was in fear because he didn't come back out. Well, he finally came back out, and there were, to put this in modern language, what in the world were you doing in there? You had us scared to death. We didn't know if the atonement was going to be accepted. They just told him, you don't ever do this again. So those are two illustrations, one from scripture, one from history. And this morning I had this guy tell me, you can't use Luke chapter 1 in reference to Hebrews chapter 9 because Luke chapter 1 has nothing to do with the Day of Atonement. I didn't say it did. I was comparing the fear because of a priest being in the holy place in this situation too long. And they were eagerly looking for him. And this is a classic case of argumentum ad desperatum, in my opinion, when you cannot see the correlation between those situations. Comments?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's great information and great illustrations too, and that historical background that you added to that is really neat. I was thinking, even as you were mentioning Hebrews chapter 10. You know, the context of chapter 9 doesn't end in verse 28 because the next verse that he mentions explains what was going on. And
Yeah.
that's all about atonement as well, and points them to the day. And as you say, to the fact that they were not to tarry. So that whole chapter, two chapters, needs to be looked at as one composite, whole in terms of the atonement there. So very interesting information, very intriguing. And
well, the point that you made there from chapter 10, verse 1 is a point that I drove home over and over and over. Chapter 10, verse 1, it's a terrible, terrible chapter division.
yes,
But it gives the reason why Christ had to come again, the second time, apart from sin, for salvation, because it starts with a little Greek word for, which is a causative particle. Here's the reason Christ had to come: for the law being a shadow of the good things about to come. Well, I was informed that the good things about to come was the rapture.
and where's that in the context?
I asked that very question, William. When I asked, where in the context do we find deliverance from the Neronian persecution? Where in the context do we find physical deliverance from the Jewish war? And where do we find the rapture? I'm still waiting on the answer to those questions.
That's one of those issues where silence demands a.
That's good. That's really good. That's exactly right. Maybe silence demands silence in this case.
Yeah.
So the whole point, ladies and gentlemen, here is the writer, and let's not forget, Hebrews chapter 8 says, after describing the priesthood and their services and the contrast between the old covenant priesthood and the priesthood of Jesus Christ in his sacrificial work in the new covenant work, he says, now the sum of the matter is of everything that we have saying is this: we have such a high priest who has passed into the heavens and is seated at the right hand of the majesty on high, who serves as a minister of the true tabernacle, which God pitched and not man. We're talking about the temple. We're talking about the Messianic temple. This is the Messianic temple of Ephesians chapter 2, Ephesians 1, Ephesians chapter 4. Christ is the minister over that. But let's not forget, and this is critical, and this is pointed out in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 24. Christ doesn't minister in a tabernacle made with hands, which is a type of the heavenly. The writer of Hebrews makes it a point of letting us know that the earthly, the physical, not only the temple itself, but the priesthood, not only the priesthood, but the sacrifices and the cultus, the priesthood, the sacrifices again. All of those things were typological. They pointed toward, as the writer says, the good things about to come. They were about to come when Hebrews was written. And so when you go to Hebrews and you take Jehoiakim's penknife and you just slice between Hebrews chapter 9, verses 6 through 27, and you separate verse 28 from it, you're doing a radical disservice to proper exegesis and proper hermeneutic. It just doesn't work. You're doing disservice to the very temple imagery that William and I are talking about between the earthly tabernacle and the heavenly tabernacle. You know, what does the coming of Christ out of the most holy place have to do with the heavenly tabernacle if it's going to be argued that, well, this is just talking about the rapture? It's talking about deliverance from the Neronian persecution. Is that why Christ was going to come out of the most holy place? Now, William, I made a point on one of my YouTube videos this week. It may be the video for in the morning. I've forgotten. But here's a point that is true. There's no question that the second coming of Christ would give deliverance from persecution, right?
That's correct. It's
Second
right in
Thessalonians.
the chapter 10 as well. But go
That's
ahead.
right. That's exactly right. So that's true in regard to what the writer goes ahead and continues to say,
Hmm.
but it's not in the context of the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement never within itself, Yom Kippur, never symbolized deliverance from physical realities. Am I correct in that?
That's correct.
I just
I've
don't,
not read anything regarding it
I have
from that
never read
perspective.
anything to suggest that the Day of Atonement typified deliverance from physical realities, from physical problems. It is always this little this little term, mech and atonement. That term is always used in reference to sin. Mech and atonement for sin, in
Hmm.
other words. And it
Yeah, the point of the persecutions was for them to endure so that they could receive that benefit of the atonement.
exactly right. You have need of patience so that after you have endured, you would receive the great reward.
Correct.
Hebrews chapter 10, verse 37, 38, right along in there. So that's exactly right. That great reward, by the way, see if you agree with this, William. You know, people tell us, and let me turn over there and read this, but
Yeah,
in
it was
Hebrew,
verse 35.
yeah, verse 35, that's right. But pardon me, in Hebrews 10 and verse 17, um, I'm sorry, that's not right. Yeah, verse 19. Therefore, brethren, what did I do? Hello? Hello?
You're still good?
Emma?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. My screen went to a totally something or other.
Mm.
I don't know what happened. Okay. Therefore, brethren, having boldness to enter the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, which is consecrated for us through the veil, which is to say his flesh, let us draw near with a pure heart, true heart, and full assurance of faith, having our conscience sprinkled with the blood of Christ and our bodies washed with pure water. We're told here, see, they already had access. Let us enter with boldness into the most holy place. So that must mean that Christ consummated the atonement at the cross. Preston, Bell, can't you see that? But William, isn't that statement, brethren, having boldness to enter the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, which he consecrated for us through his flesh, the veil, isn't that the great reward that they would receive at the parousia?
Absolutely. And even in the context, as you read further, he says, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering. Well, what's hope all about?
Yeah. And chapter 6, let's not forget, Hebrews chapter 6 talks about Christ, the forerunner of our faith, has entered into that which is within the veil, which hope we have as an anchor of the soul.
Yes.
So again, this entering into the veil, entering into the most holy place, was still very much hope when the writer of Hebrews wrote. And there's another element. And in my discussions on YouTube and Facebook, both, I kept bringing up this issue, William. And folks, this has everything in the world to do with the Messianic temple. Over the last couple of weeks, and of course, I wasn't with you last week, but been discussing the nature of the Messianic temple. It's not made with hands. It is built upon the living Messiah, Jesus, as the chief cornerstone,
Mhm.
and the apostles and prophets are the building blocks, as it were. That tells us it's not a literal physical edifice. And this is so critical in modern day discussions. Boy, I saw something just last week. I meant to highlight it. I was super busy doing some other research and I just caught a glimpse of it. Uh, but I just caught this ever so brief snippet of someone telling me the Knesset in Israel has authorized the rebuilding of the temple. We are on the cusp. It is here. It is now. I go, oh no, here we go.
Not again, right?
And not again, not again, not again, not again, not again. And I thought to myself, okay, I got to save this and come back and see, okay, what's new this time? What development? And I thought, well, it can't be the red heifer because they had five that were shipped over there.
Mhm.
Three of them have already been disqualified, so now they're down to two, and time is running out because they're getting too old. So all five of those are going to be disqualified, and the temple will not be rebuilt, and they can't even begin on it until they have the red heifer sacrifice, which means, the law of Moses has got to be restored. There's so much wrong with that. So anyway, we've been pointing out the nature of this. One of the things that I pointed out in my debates, if you please, on this whole issue was this individual was pointing to Hebrews chapter 10, verse 19. Therefore, brethren, having boldness to enter into the most holy place, he was already present. I said, well, let's go to Revelation and talk about entrance into the most holy place. William, according to Revelation, when could man enter the most holy place?
That was after the wrath of God was completed.
Hmm.
And of course,
Against whom?
Against the Jews, the unbelieving Jews. And of course,
Babylon.
yeah, Mystery
That's
Babylon, which is Jerusalem, of course.
yes.
And that just dovetails right back into Luke 21, 20 through 22. John the Baptist talked about it in Matthew 3. And of course, you got Paul in 1 Thessalonians 2, 14 through 16. And you have that cup being full in Revelation 17, which is Mystery Babylon. And I think a good friend of mine wrote a great book on that some years ago. His name might have started with the D. I don't know. You have any idea who it could be? But yeah, Who is This Babylon by
Yeah.
Dunn K. Preston. Make sure you get a copy of that book. It's excellent, and he goes into all of the detail and ramifications of that process. So
Thank you for that promo, the checks in the mail.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, yeah, folks, look, according to Hebrews chapter 9, there could be no entrance into the most holy place as long as there was no forgiveness. As long as the old law, the law of Moses, stood, there was no forgiveness.
Mhm.
Therefore, there's no entrance into the most holy place as long as the law of Moses stood valid, right?
That's right.
Okay. But we come over here to the book of Revelation, and there's no entrance into the most holy place until the wrath of God is poured out against the city Babylon, which, as you said, is the city where the Lord was crucified, Old Covenant Jerusalem. It is absolute perfect harmony. This one individual who kept saying that I was teaching heresy, absolutely refused over a period of days after day after day after day. And in every single one of my posts, I would say, when are you going to discuss Revelation and entrance into the most holy place? He refused to discuss it, except finally he said, I've already addressed this by going to Hebrews chapter 9 and showing you where you're wrong. No, that's what you call circular reasoning.
Absolutely.
Absolutely circular reasoning. And so this is one of those issues. And folks, let me make an observation here. William and I were raised in a religious environment that said when the faithful Christian dies today, they do not go to heaven. They do not get to go to the most holy place, heaven itself. And while we are alive here on earth, we are not in the presence of God, truly. We have to die. Then we have to go to Abraham's bosom and wait for who knows how many thousands or hundreds of thousands or gazillions of years until Christ comes and destroys Hades. That's Revelation chapter 20, right? Hey, there it is. Well, here's the problem, among others, among many, many, many other problems. Hebrews chapter 9, as I just went across, says there could be no entrance into the most holy place because of sin and because the law of Moses could not take away sin. So as long as the law of Moses stood valid, there was no forgiveness and thus no entrance into the most holy place. That's what Hebrews 9 teaches, folks, verses 6 through 10. And let me tell a little story here, a little anecdote. Several years ago, as news of my heresy began to spread and the controversy began to spread, I received a phone call one evening, and it was a group of men, 3 or 4 men. They turned out to be a couple of elders. I guess they were all elders from a congregation down in Texas. They were in town. Turned out they were elders at a congregation where the mother and father of some of our members attended. The mother was going to the elders saying, "You got to put a stop to this. You got to do something about this guy. He's teaching our children heresy." So they said, "If you wouldn't mind getting together with us, we'd love to study with you." I said, "Well, okay." So I went out to a hotel. We got together for coffee. For 4 hours, they grilled me. And I would simply answer the questions. I wouldn't reciprocate. I didn't come back at them with a whole lot of questions, a few, but by and large, I just let them ask questions. And finally they said, "Well, okay, we think you've pretty well answered our questions." I said, "Okay, now it's my turn." And they kind of looked at each other like, "What does he mean his turn?" You know? I said, "Brother, let me ask you a question. When a faithful child of God dies today, where do they go?" Well, they'd never really thought about it, obviously, but they kind of looked sideways at each other. And finally, one of them spoke up and said, "Well, Abraham's bosom." I said, "So when a faithful child of God dies today, they don't go to heaven, right?" "Oh, no, no. I said, "Okay. Why?" Well, they'd never been asked that question before. Finally, one of them said, "Well, because uh, we don't have forgiveness today." I said, "Oh, really? Okay." One of them had his Bible in his hand. I said, "Would you turn to Hebrews chapter 9 for us and read verses 6 to 10, please?" Well, he did. I said, "Brother, let me just lay it out there very, very simply, as simply as I can. As long, or number one, there's no forgiveness of sin under the law of Moses. You just told me we do not have forgiveness of sin today. Therefore, according to your own statement, we're still under the law of Moses. Secondly, since we don't have forgiveness of sin, not only are we under the law, that's why we don't get to go to heaven." I said, "Answer me this question, brethren. Is the law of Moses still in effect?" "Oh, no, 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 no." I said, "Well, okay. If the law of Moses is no longer in effect, then why do we not have forgiveness?" "Well, we do." I said, "No, wait a minute, fellas. You just told me we don't." "Well, we've got the promise of it." I said, "Well, guys, they had the promise of forgiveness under the old law.
That's right.
They just didn't have it." And that's exactly what you described our condition today under Christ. I said, "So please tell me, how much different are we under Christ than under the old law?" They didn't have an answer for that. And finally, one of them said, "Well, yeah, we're definitely forgiven today. We definitely have forgiveness." I said, "Well, I appreciate that answer." And I said, "I agree with you 100%. But I said, that raises another question. If we are genuinely forgiven of our sin as Christians, tell me why we have to go to Abraham's bosom, not heaven, when we die." I mean, they realized they had just entrapped themselves, coming, going, backwards, forwards, up and down. And finally, one of them said, I don't have any answers for this. I don't know what to tell you." I said, brother, the problem of it is we've been teaching that we're still under the law of Moses in the
Hmm.
churches of Christ. That's the only logical conclusion we can draw based upon your own answers to me. And when you tell me we don't get to go to heaven when we die, you're telling me the law of Moses is still in effect. You're telling me we don't have forgiveness. But when you turn around and say that we generally are forgiven, then you've just eliminated any reason for us not going to heaven when we die, because the only thing keeping a person out of heaven is what? I said, can one of you answer the question for me? I said, what's the only thing that keeps us from going to heaven? They said, oh, well, sin. I said, oh, okay. So Jesus doesn't have to come to take us to heaven. We're already forgiven. Therefore, we get to go to heaven. And I said, guess what that means, guys? Hebrews 9:28. It means Christ came and brought forgiveness for us in
Hmm.
his second coming. Well, that really did mess them up. Well, we've been at this an awful long time. I believe that we've got the answers that we need. Well, they had answers that they certainly didn't expect. But this is the dilemma. And when when we talk to people today, so many people, the majority of people, certainly those outside of the amillennial world, certainly and especially outside of the churches of Christ, when you ask them, when a faithful child of God dies today, where do they go? What's the answer?
Some of them say to heaven.
Absolutely.
Of course, Gus Nichols basically had that view in the Churches of Christ as well. And that was totally at odds with, most, as you were just explaining, with most of the people who were in the church, because they thought, well, that's not true, but yet that was a position that he advocated.
Yeah, and he got in lots of trouble for it. And
Yes.
I remember one lectureship at the Frida Hardeman College lectureship. I wasn't very old at all, in which he and I forgot whether it was Guyan Woods. Might have been the two of them very often tied it up. But
Hmm.
anyway, he was the brunt of criticism for his view on going to heaven when you die.
Yeah.
And
Based
so
on 2 Corinthians 5, I think.
Second Corinthians chapter 5. And he never developed Hebrews chapter 9, obviously, because that really would have gotten him into major
Yes.
trouble. But so here we have, in the vast majority of denominationalism today, the view that, well, hey, when we die as a faithful child of God, we go directly to heaven. We go into the most holy place. Okay, then that means that the wrath of God in Revelation against Babylon is finished, consummated. So if you take, let me see, if you go to the book of Revelation and you say, oh, well, you know what? Babylon, that's the Roman Catholic Church. Well, if we go to heaven when we die, then the Roman Catholic Church has already been destroyed, right? Oh, well, okay, the beast is Rome. But when we die, we go to heaven. Okay, then the wrath of God against Rome is finished in the coming of the Lord, judgment and resurrection, by the way. Therefore, the Lord did come if we get to go to heaven when we die. I mean, all of this segues together so
Yes.
harmoniously and beautifully. And yet, and I'm writing this book, as you know, on the millennium. The working title of it right now is The Mystery of the Millennium Unveiled. There are so many different facets of biblical theology. And you take this author makes some really, really good points, and he stops short. And you get this author makes some really, really good points, and he stops short. And Tom and Steve Kloski wrote a book this large, The Second Coming of Christ Accomplished. Wasn't that the name of it?
I think so. I can't remember because it's been a while since
Oh, it's
since they
yeah,
wrote that book. It
yeah,
was
it's been a long time.
back in our black hair days.
Yeah, I remember those. Yes, indeed, I do. And that's when we actually had hair. And I'm every time I wash my hair, I'm going, whoa, what's happening here? But anyway, the Kloskis, the book is about this thick. And
Hmm.
what they've done is they've gone through the literature, especially the churches of Christ. Their book was aimed at members of the churches of Christ. And they gathered these quotes from one noted scholar in the churches of Christ after another, applying this text to AD 70. The others don't. But then many of the others, they apply another text to AD 70, and the others don't. But what they did, they put together this entire compilation of quotes from noted scholars from the churches of Christ showing you can put together the story of covenant eschatology from quotes from members of the churches of Christ.
Absolutely.
And yet they call us heretics because we do that. And it's absolutely amazing. I need to go back and drag that book out and mine that, for some of the famous brethren in the churches of Christ, some of the things that they've said. I'm like you. I haven't read that book in a long, long time. But they did some good work in this.
Yeah, they did. The article I wrote years ago, "To Whom Shall We Go,"
Oh yeah.
was a very brief summary of that premise. And basically did the same thing. And I think Daniel Rogers and I revisited that subject some years ago in a couple of videos where we did the roundabout eschatology thing. But we pulled all these quotes from all these guys in the church that basically gave us a direct line to covenant eschatology based on the comments that they made, and they're documented in their books, and we can find them. So they're making the very same arguments that we're making. I don't know if I told you. Yeah, I think we did have that conversation once. When my former congregation, one of the elders there, who was the son of an elder who was there when I was there. He actually taught a class on the night that I was baptized. But anyway, he's passed on now. And they had contacted me to have a discussion on, my views, which I thought was going to be an extended discussion. But after the first meeting, uh, you know, they haven't gotten in touch with me since that time.
Yeah.
And but I gave them plenty of material, to follow along those lines. But that's just the way it is. They see this occurring, they see the logic of it, but then they don't have answers for it. And then they're just like the elders that you spoke with earlier. It's time to quit.
Yeah. Well, you can't see my desk, but it's pretty much like yours. It's stacked this high, books everywhere. And I stand in amazement every day as I read scholarship and I read these commentaries. I was reading a commentary just a little bit ago. It's from the International Critical Commentary, a very highly acclaimed
Mhm.
a scholarship set, as you well know. W.C. Allen is the author, commenting on Matthew chapter 22 and the parable of the great wedding feast. and of course, W.C. Allen was a liberal. But he says in this parable, the editor very clearly saw the connection between the parousia and the fall of Jerusalem. Hello. Yeah, you're
Hard to
right.
miss in that text. Very
It's
hard to miss in that
it's
text.
it's really, really hard to miss. And so I mean, this is written back, years and years and years ago. And I know, I mean, we've been talking about members of the Church of Christ, commentators in the Church of Christ, but it's true across the entire spectrum
Mhm.
of scholars who see the direction. They see the storyline of things pointing to AD 70, pointing to the judgment of Israel, pointing to the new creation rising out of the destruction of the old creation of Israel. They see that. Robert Owen or John Owen, famous Reformed commentator. Second Peter chapter 3. Oh, that's about AD 70. That has nothing to do with the end of the world. My goodness gracious. Henry Drummond, if I'm not mistaken, a 16th century, I think that's correct. I had a microfiche of him at one time. I went down to a local library and ordered a microfiche. And on 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Now, mind you, this is the 16th century, if memory is serving me correct. Henry Drummond commenting on 1 Corinthians chapter 15, there is no doubt that this change of the body was a change from the mortal body of Old Covenant Israel to the New Covenant body of Jesus Christ.
Wow.
But then you could see him hearing the mobs outside the door going, now that doesn't mean that there's not a yet future transformation of the physical body, of course. But the real meaning is this. And you just shake your head, you know. But we see that over and over and over again. And yet, you know, it's so exciting to see things changing. You know, William, it's this Thursday, I guess. Yeah, this Thursday, about 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to be having a Zoom meeting with a divinity student in Pakistan. He's studying to get his doctoral degree. And he's going to write his thesis on covenant eschatology.
That's interesting. I did a study with a gentleman in Pakistan this past Monday at 6 a.m.
What was his name?
in the morning. Cameron. Is that
No,
can't be
different guy?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, different guy. So see, but we are hearing from more and more and more and more people just exactly like this. People who are pursuing, by the way, their higher degrees, their academic degrees. And so, whereas one of the complaints against preterism for years has been, oh, you don't have any accredited scholars,
Mm-hmm.
you know, what
Mm-hmm.
have you.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to change. That's going to change over the next several years. And it's going to be amazing what a difference that's going to make. You know, I don't have to tell you, you know, you have an honorary doctorate, I have an honorary doctorate. And I can tell you the doors that just having that honorary doctorate has opened have been absolutely amazing. And it continues to happen.
Yeah.
So when we find and when we are going to find men who are academically fully accredited, setting forth their pardon me, their doctoral thesis, their published monographs, what have you, setting forth these ideas, things are looking up even more than they're going right now. And it's astounding the way covenant eschatology is growing right now.
It most definitely is. I mean, it's really growing, and I am sure that as they write in their doctoral thesis, they're going to quote a lot from Don Preston with all of the books that are out there. But that's, as you say, I mean, that's really amazing to consider and to see how the landscape is going to develop along those lines, in time to come. So, that'll just lay aside another one of those arguments that they have been making, that's, they want to use to sidestep the effectiveness of, what's been presented. And it'll just confirm the things that have been said over the past 40 years and before with, other men who had gone even before us.
Exactly right. And, folks, let us kind of recapitulate a lot of what we have seen tonight. We've spent time talking about entrance into the most holy place. We're not talking about a literal physical most holy place in Jerusalem in a reconstructed physical temple. As we have been showing from the book of Hebrews and from the book of Ephesians, that is not the nature of the temple that the Old Testament prophets foretold or that the New Testament writers said was under construction in the first century. Once we grasp the spiritual significance and the power of living in the presence of God today without a temple made with hands, that is an empowering, liberating reality. We don't have to go to Jerusalem to be in a temple. We don't have to go to Jerusalem and offer sacrifices in that place. Wherever we are at, we can offer the sacrifice of praise unto God. That is the fruit of our lips, giving thanks and praise unto him. This is the beauty and the glory of the spiritual temple of which we are members. Any closing thoughts, William?
Well, I think that sums it up pretty well. John 4, not in Jerusalem, nor in Mount Gerizim.
Amen.
but in spirit and in truth, in the Father, and Christ and the Father are the temple of God. That's the house not made with hands.
Amen. All right. Well, it'll be great to be with you again. Folks, thank you for being with us here on Two Guys in the Bible, a voice you can trust. And with that, I'm going to say good night and God bless.
All right. Good night.
All righty. Well, get this processed and posted and go eat some supper.
There you go.
All right. Good night, man.
All right. Take care.